Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are exploring a genuinely fascinating perspective from Jen Wilkin's groundbreaking book, Dust to Dust, Aging Wisely in an Anti-Aging World. If you've ever felt, just a quiet sense of panic about getting older, or if you constantly feel the heavy pressure of a culture that tells you to fight the clock every single day, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to unpack how Wilkin's work completely challenges our modern intense fear of growing older and offers a really beautiful alternative framework for how to view the entire human lifespan.
Okay, let's dive into this with a quick question for you to think about. How old do you actually feel on the inside? In the source interviews for this book, it's fascinating to note how many adults, even those in their 50s, 60s, and beyond, mentally feel completely stuck at maybe 24 or 38. Regardless of our actual physical age, it's like our internal clock just hits pause. We feel so much younger than the person the mirror reflects back at us, and that perfectly sets up the massive tension the author explores between our minds, our bodies, and our society.
And, well, that tension leads to this really stark observation from the source material. Our culture essentially treats getting older as a sickness. It's viewed as a literal disease that we have to cure or avoid at all costs. Think about it. We're constantly being sold shots, pills, serums, and surgeries just to keep us from catching old age. Instead of seeing the passage of time as a totally natural, God-given process of human development, the overwhelming cultural message is that aging is this tragic decline that you just have to battle every single step of the way.
Section 1. The Anti-Aging False Story.
The sources argue that modern society operates on a totally false narrative, one that equates youth with ultimate value. The book actually contrasts two very distinct viewpoints. On the cultural side, aging equals obsolescence. Human worth is tied directly to how productive and fiercely independent you are. But Wilkin presents a biblical view that argues the exact opposite. She suggests that aging is designed to bring increasing wisdom, and importantly, that dependence isn't some loss of dignity. It's a core, intentional feature of being human. Our modern world has mistakenly convinced us that if we aren't 100% self-reliant, we're somehow losing our worth. Because we're so terrified of losing that worth, we fall into a cycle that Wilkin strikingly labels elective body dysmorphia. The sources describe this as choosing to alter our physical exterior to match that false, younger, 24-year-old feeling we have on the inside, all while flat out denying the reality of our true age. There are entire multi-billion-dollar industries built to profit precisely off this refusal to accept the simple truth of the passage of time and the natural, expected changes of our bodies. And this brilliantly illustrates the tech metaphor Wilkin uses. She points out that modern society often treats aging humans like an obsolete first-generation iPhone that you just stuff in a drawer. Once you can't download the latest app, you're suddenly irrelevant. But historically, older age was viewed more like a really fine vase that gains value and preciousness over decades. In fact, the sources note that in cultures like Kenya, being called aged is an incredibly high compliment. No way we'd hear that in the West today, right? We have entirely lost that perspective. Section 2. The Symmetrical Arc of Life. So if that cultural narrative is totally flawed, what's the alternative? To explain this, the author introduces a really fascinating literary concept called a chiastic structure. If you aren't familiar with it, it's a poetic device commonly found in ancient texts where concepts are mirrored symmetrically. Think of it like a staircase. You walk up to a landing at the top, and then the steps going down mirror the exact same steps you took on the way up. Wilkin uses this beautiful structure to map out the human lifespan, revealing what she describes as a profound, symmetrical poetry in the very design of our lives. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how clearly we can see this chronological mirror. Look at how perfectly phase 2 reflects phase 1. We start our lives by gaining breath, and we end by losing it. We gain strength and ability in our youth, and we gracefully lose those exact same attributes in senior adulthood. In early adulthood, we care downward for our kids. In late midlife, we care upward for our aging parents. The middle of life is simply the peak, the landing on those stairs, the place of perspective, where we can look back at the beginning and forward to the end. The end of life is not a tragic accident. It is the perfectly designed mirror image of the beginning. You can see this mapped out even clearer on a timeline. At 0 years old, we're completely dependent. We are totally receiving care. By around 30, we hit peak independence, and we are the ones giving the care. But zoom ahead to 85, and we naturally return to a state of dependence, receiving care once again. Life ends exactly as it begins. Understanding this, that we have a natural return to receiving care, naturally sets up our next major paradigm shift from the sources.
Section 3. The Beauty of Dependence.
This brings us to a major pivot, reframing our deep-seated cultural fear of being a burden. In modern society, needing help is so often viewed as the ultimate failure, right? But Wilkin makes a really profound argument here. She suggests that we actually need to unlearn the original sin of self-reliance. From her perspective, dependence is absolutely not a tragic interruption of human flourishing. It's actually a vital, faithful lesson in humility and trust. When we allow others to care for us in our later years, we're giving them the opportunity to learn service, just exactly as we did when we were younger. It's the culmination of human dignity, not the loss of it.
This totally ties into what the author calls a theology of the body. Think about the prevailing cultural narrative. It constantly insists that the body, especially the female body, is primarily decorative, just an ornament meant to be looked at. But the biblical narrative presented in the source flips this entirely on its head. The body is primarily useful for service. Think about how incredibly liberating it is to view your body as a tool designed for caregiving and good works, rather than just a mere decoration that's inevitably going to fade and wrinkle anyway. The sources share a deeply poignant personal anecdote that really anchors this idea. One of the speakers tells the story of her mother who had undergone a double mastectomy. Standing in a dressing room, bearing the very deep physical scars of her illness and aging, the mother simply looked in the mirror and said, "I'm just so glad to be alive." Wow. It completely reframes our entire perspective. A body that simply works, a body that literally just allows us to be present and breathe, is a profound gift, regardless of any cosmetic flaws or scars it accumulates along the way.
Section 4. Developing imperishable beauty. So the crucial point is, how do we actually put this into practice? Wilkin captures this shift in a really simple, brilliant phrase. Bodies decline, people develop. She argues that while our physical forms will inevitably weaken and eventually fade into what she calls physical invisibility, our personhood, our wisdom, and our character should be growing richer, deeper, and more luminous. Aging is literally the process of your inner self developing as your outer self declines. But, and this is important, that development isn't automatic. The book warns that as we age, we are becoming more so, meaning our habits literally calcify. If you spend your youth being totally self-absorbed and panicked about your looks, you're going to calcify into a self-absorbed older person. But if you choose service, you grow into something beautiful. The source shares a really touching story of a 91-year-old grandmother named Nanny. Her family marveled at her absolute beauty at her funeral, not because she looked young, but because decades of choosing holiness over self-absorption resulted in her becoming a wonderfully luminous, deeply loving person. She became more so of the good things. Let's move to Ben and see how this builds into real, actionable steps for anyone currently in their 20s, 30s, or 40s. The sources suggest leading a self-forgetful life of service, really using your hands and feet for others. Intentionally spend time overlapping with multiple generations, rather than just staying stuck in your own age bracket. Reevaluate how much time and money you're spending idolizing physical appearance and buying those anti-aging serums. When you give care today, try to view it as humble training for when you will receive care tomorrow. And finally, number your days. Recognize your time is limited so you can become a thoughtful curator of the days you have left, rather than just a thoughtless consumer. Ultimately, Wilkin grounds her whole argument in what she calls the resurrection hope. While the cultural hope of the future or the afterlife is honestly pretty shallow, like, I don't know, finally getting a flawless complexion or thinner thighs, the biblical hope presented is all about perfected usefulness. The sources remind us that even Jesus' resurrected body retained its scars. Think about that for a second. That is incredibly telling. Our ultimate hope isn't about cosmetic perfection. It is about the total restoration of our bodies for their true intended purpose. Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought. As time passes, and your physical body naturally begins to slide into what culture considers invisibility, what will remain? Will the luminosity of your inner character shine through? This is the ultimate challenge from the source material, to finally stop fighting the clock, to embrace the beautiful symmetrical arc of life, and to cultivate an imperishable beauty today that is going to far outlast any anti-aging product on the market. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you with something truly meaningful to reflect on.